Great, thank you so much. Can you all hear me? Great. So I'm going to get started here. So for my presentation today, welcome and thank you so much for joining me. I've had my coffee and a swim this morning, so I am ready to go. Welcome, and I've added the word still to my talk here because the Black press has a long history and served this kind of role of providing care for almost 200 years. So a lot of this talk is going to be about history, but also about the present day. So I just kind of want to recognize the word that the Black press still does these things. So the Black press refers to African-American owned and operated newspapers. And since their inception in the first half of the 19th century, nearly every major American city has had a member of the Black press. Today, there are over 150 such newspapers, and many of them have scaled back production since their pinnacle, but they still remain a key part of kind of our mediascape. So these newspapers address Black audiences, speak on Black issues important to African Americans, and advocate for the Black community. And many digital outlets and Black media companies continue to play this role, expanding our notions of the Black press beyond newspapers. So in this talk, I will show how the Black press fruitfully countered the racist hegemonic ideals of American society, helped redeem traditional notions of journalism and democracy, and continued to cultivate the care work necessary for a community not fully served by dominant media. Ultimately, I argue that the Black press and Black media in general continue to play a vital role in our society, and it's in everyone's best interest, regardless of race or background, for this important social institution to survive and to thrive in the future. So before we get started, and before we get into the specifics of the Black owned and operated press, I simply want to ask a seemingly simple question here. Like, what is journalism for? What is the purpose of journalism? So to orient us sociologically, I want us to see we are questioning what the point or purpose of journalism is as a social institution. In sociology, this model I have here is called the hierarchy of influence, basically the different positions or locations where meaning is made. So if you think about yourself as an individual and why you do what you do, you can see how you're embedded in different levels of meaning making. So you have different routines and norms when you interact with different organizations and social institutions, like when you go to work or go to the grocery store, or go to the dentist. You have different behaviors, patterns of belief, and priorities when you interact with your family versus when you go to school. And all of these social institutions are further influenced by larger systems or the culture you're living in, so that schools in China, for example, might be different than the kinds of educational institutions in the US, or the cultural routines and practices of a Nigerian family might be different than some of the routines and ways of doing of a Canadian family. So media scholars have used this and asked, when we look at a media artifact, a television show, a social media post, a magazine, an advertising, what have you, we can ask why it looks the way it does, how and why it means what it does, and we can see how these meanings and practices come from these different sociological levels. Maybe it's because of the culture the media message came from, or maybe it's the idiosyncrasies of an individual that determines why a piece of media looks and behaves the way it does. And for our conversation, I really want to ask what makes journalism different than other forms of communication. Why do we have something separate we call news compared to advertising or entertainment? What is the purpose of the social institution compared to the other forms of communication that constitute media? So to understand journalism as a social institution, we need to look at history and a key transition. And for our purposes, we can identify the move from a feudal society order, a social order defined by the divine right of kings, to the admittedly smugly named modern social order and the notion of liberal democracy and rule through consent. So here's the feudal social order, known as the Great Chain of Being. This was a strict, unchanging social hierarchy, with those at the top having more power, dignity, respect, and resources than those at the bottom. So for medieval Europe, this meant having God up top, below that were angels, and the first human in this order is a divinely appointed king or queen. So the point is, a person was born into their social position, and it was seen as arranged by God and therefore unchangeable, and people, for the most part, kind of knew their place and authority came from above. In the birth of the modern era, a different worldview takes hold, one known as classical liberalism. The divine authority of the king was dismissed, and instead political power was seen as a two-way street in the form of a republic. Political authority didn't just come from above, but was instead consented to by the people being ruled. It was thus a notion of popular sovereignty that legitimated government, not a hereditary ruler appointed by a king or by God. Instead of preparing for the next life, classical liberalism focused on the secular human world and then elevated human reason and rational thinking. Knowledge was no longer seen as something revealed, but was instead something observable by empirical knowledge and using the five senses. And out of this worldview and modern notions of science took shape. And finally, in classical liberalism, it's understood that the world is a collection of individuals, each of whom, at least initially it was property-owning white men, was entitled to individual rights. So once there is no longer a divinely ordained king and a fixed social order where tradition kind of provides all of life's answers, people then need a new form of communication. So if democracy equals self-government, that people power of popular sovereignty, then the public needs good, reliable information to understand the world, to talk it out, to hold the powerful accountable, and to make informed choices about how to build their worlds. So we can identify journalism as this process of gathering, verifying, and delivering truthful information of consequence to citizens in a democracy. And if journalism is a process, that is, it's something actively made, not just kind of found out in the world, then we can ask, what is this process for? So scholars and practitioners have answered this question about the role or purpose of journalism with three popular metaphors. And you've probably heard some of these. So at first, it's been said that journalism is a mirror to society, that it's a way for society to see itself, to understand itself, and ideally it can see the good and the bad so that citizens can properly reflect and respond accordingly. You can see what's in the news right now and ask what this says about our current state of things. So journalism can be seen as a mirror of what we value, prioritize, and how we live. Journalism has also been described as a watchdog, that is something that barks and calls attention when something isn't right. So being a watchdog for society means journalism holds people and other social institutions accountable and supposedly looks out for the public's best interest. And finally, journalism is said to create a marketplace of ideas. That is, media lets in a bunch of different views and voices and topics and interests in the public arena, and then people will choose or buy the best idea. Now, these metaphors are only ideals, but these are standards by which we can evaluate and critique media and if it's doing what it should be doing for citizens in a democracy. Another metaphor, but one with some depth here, journalism has also been described as facilitating a public sphere. So here's a basic definition for you: a space where equal citizens can have conversations and form public opinions outside the purview of government and the market or other forms of authority. And this public opinion then influences the workings of the state. So with the concept of the public sphere, we can see how society, our existence and dependence on each other as a group, is created through communication. So newspapers, magazines, websites, blogs, whatever technological form journalism takes, it creates a realm where people can learn about each other, deliberate, and form opinions about themselves, each other, and the world. If people are doing this, then we call this overall trend of social belief public opinion. So the public sphere is a realm of deliberation, debate, exchange of ideas, where individuals can come together to freely discuss and identify social problems, and through these discussions influence political action. So journalism thus creates a forum in which the authority of the state and the powerful in general can be criticized, and those in power are called upon to justify themselves before an informed and reasoning public. Again, this is all in the ideal state. So if we wanted to think about journalism, these metaphors in more literal or sociological terms, when we ask what journalism is for, we can use more exact language about what journalism does for democracy, the function and roles it plays. It can improve the civic health of democracy by enabling and empower citizens to make informed decisions, collaborate, and come to a rough kind of consensus in order to have self-government. So the most obvious one is that journalism can inform citizens. It acts as an extension of our individual senses in order to observe and report on things that are happening in the world that the individual would otherwise not see or know. But it is more complicated than that. Merely giving and receiving information is not enough to be called news. We are bombarded with information and not all of it is valuable. So journalists don't just inform, they go a step further and analyze information. They prioritize based on professional norms and judgments, and they interpret what information is most relevant and explain how it fits into the bigger picture of society. So journalism provides a truthful, comprehensive, and intelligent account of the day's events in a context that gives it meaning and makes it useful to citizens. So it doesn't just inform, it also analyzes, interprets, and explains. Next, journalism investigates. So instead of just listening to official sources or what those in power say, quality journalism can sometimes play this role of looking behind the curtain at how the sausage is made. They can look behind official rhetoric and investigate and verify what is happening and behind the scenes or what's going on without public knowledge. Journalism also helps create a public conversation. So journalism is essentially a way for society to talk to itself. From these first two roles, citizens can understand what's going on. And then from this third role, we can see they can then have conversations about how the world is and perhaps how it ought to be. While it's not the only place this happens, journalism helps create a space where citizens can have conversations and form public opinion outside the purview of government or the market. And even if this happens online and in other places, journalism is different because it can provide verified, trustworthy information and help set the terms of the debate. Journalism can also help generate social empathy. It's been said that journalism can give a voice to the voiceless, showing the public the lives and situation of those that have been marginalized or perhaps forgotten. And despite our abilities to tailor our own news feeds or to confirm our pre-existing biases, quality journalism isn't about seeing the world only through our own eyes or expecting everyone to act like we want them to. It's about discovering the diversity and strangeness of things while also understanding the common humanity that we all share. It's about realizing we live in a society and a world with others, and can also help create community, that sense that we are kind of all in this together. So instead of people simply confirming what they already believe, journalism, again, ideally, can attempt to spread genuine understanding. It can encourage citizens to be attentive to one another, to actually listen, to seek to understand before passing judgment, and to encourage empathy and good faith communication and connection. Not that you have to agree with other people, but that journalism can help you understand at least where other people are coming from. Journalism can also encourage accountability. So journalism can shed spotlight on persons or organizations and hold them responsible for their actions. So if you've ever heard the term journalism as the fourth estate, this refers to the idea of the press being a check on the other three branches of government, but it also extends beyond holding the government accountable, as there are plenty of other sources of power and potential abuse and corruption in the world. And finally, journalism can also reify, and that just means articulate or make more real our shared values, as well as invite us into our identities by showing us what is normal, acceptable, or desirable. So looking at history and actually existing journalism, though, we can quickly see that these are only ideals and that media can actually do the exact opposite of their supposed principles. So instead of informing, analyzing, and explaining situations to the public, it can also misinform. Instead of investigating the powerful, it can also uncritically accept what we've been told. Instead of encouraging public conversation, it can stifle or stop the exchange of ideas. And instead of empathy and understanding, it also generate fear, hatred, and mistrust. So even today, when we're evaluating media, we can ask what specific media outlets or messages are doing for citizens living in a democracy and how they go about communicating and achieving their goals. Are they behaving in these more desirable ways to encourage understanding and community, or are they doing the exact opposite? And looking at history, I am going to argue that the Black press, without the Black press, that the US public sphere, that space for deliberation to consider the shape and nature of the world, remains incomplete. And when we don't consider the Black press, along with other alternative presses like the feminist press or the Native American press, American media tends more to the behaviors on the right than the ideals on the left. So we've seen classical liberalism says journalism is for, and I've made an argument that the Black press helps realize these ideals. I've said they're Black owned and operated newspapers, so let's look at some historical iterations to better define what the Black press is and does. So the first Black owned and operated newspaper was established in 1827 during the period of American slavery. At this time, white folks would print all sorts of disparaging things about Black people in newspapers. In New York, for example, stories and editorials ran arguing that free Black people, even if they were educated and owned property, should not be able to vote. When Black folks wanted to respond, they were denied space in white-owned newspapers. A famous newspaper at the time, the New York Sun, had a motto that said, "The sun shines for all." When asked to print an editorial written by a Black man arguing for his right to vote, the editor of the Sun made clear that what the motto really meant was, quote, "The sun shines for all white men and not for colored men," unquote. The Black press was thus founded because Black Americans were intentionally excluded from the public sphere of deliberation and were otherwise denied the ability to represent oneself in the court of public opinion. How could journalism then claim to be a mirror to society or a watchdog for public interest if it did not reflect back or account for certain segments of the population? More than access to some idealized public sphere, however, or some competitive marketplace of ideas, the Black press originated as a pivotal institution of representation. Its early editors actively fought the stereotyping, prejudice, and outright rejection of conventional media and provided Black folks the positive tools of self-determined image making. Reporting on Black excellence, advocating for abolition, and seeking to strengthen their readers' character, Freedom's Journal editors overcame their marginalization from a larger public sphere and seized a key means of moral and political autonomy, the identity-inducing tools of media and discourse. So through the newspaper, Cornish and Rustrum created a community around common issues, advocated for the rights of that community, and criticized conventional society when it lazily stereotyped members of that community or treated them unjustly. Thus, in its very first iteration, the Black press fruitfully expanded the public sphere and created new opportunities to cultivate a positive sense of identity, social imagination, and democratic connection. Expanding the public sphere of deliberation before the Civil War meant countering the dominant ideas of the day that Black folks were destined for servitude, so the Black press played an explicitly advocacy role. The North Star was a newspaper from the famous abolitionist Frederick Douglass, and in its prospectus, he said the paper would attack slavery in all its forms and aspects, advocate universal emancipation, exact the standard of public morality, promote the moral and intellectual improvement of colored people, and to hasten the date of freedom to our 3 million enslaved countrymen. So along with advocacy, we can also see that education and uplift as the animating function of the Black press. And by countering the dominant ideas of the time, that is what's meant by hegemony. And this is a key concept happening at the larger social system or cultural level. So I just want to slow down and kind of define this. Hegemony and hegemonic thinking is simply the recognition that power and social control are not merely exercised through brute force, they are also maintained through the soft power of ideology and the acceptance of dominant ideas. So this can be seen as rule through consent, because even people in subordinate positions can accept the idea that a ruling group's interests are everyone's interests, and that the current state of affairs is simply natural, necessary, or preferable. So to maintain social control, people in power do not simply tell people what to do or what to think, they also define what's normal and what people think is even possible or desirable. A hegemonic idea is something widely accepted, relatively questioned, and considered common sense by a larger social system. In its history, we can see the Black press had to continually push back against the supposed common sense notion that there is a racial hierarchy, or that white people were better and more deserving than other races of resources, empathy, and care. In our metaphor, we could say that the Black press enriched the marketplace of ideas by ensuring more viewpoints and nuanced positions were available. So in other words, the Black press countered hegemony, improved notions of common sense, and helped make the public sphere both more insightful and more democratic. Not just for advocacy, countering hegemony could get us closer to the truth as well. Pioneering journalist Ida B. Wells invented a new form of journalism that improved on dominant newspapers' fact-based objectivity. So in the 1890s, the lynching or vigilante killing without a trial of African Americans was prevalent. Self-proclaimed fact-based newspapers like the New York Times would simply report these events without context, like this lynching happened here, this lynching happened there. This just the facts reporting assumed the guilt of the Black person lynched, as did the framing of African Americans as so-called brutes prone to committing crimes. So basically, there's a reporting of event where a Black person is getting supposedly what they deserve. Enter Ida B. Wells, who does some investigative reporting. She interviews accusers, questions police, seeks out witnesses, gathers statistics on lynching throughout different regions, and she finds that many African Americans were lynched not for crimes as reported in the newspapers, but sometimes simply for having a consensual relationship with a white person, or that a witness had lied, or that criminal accusations were actually only invented until after the lynching became public knowledge. So Wells did original reporting. She didn't just rely on official sources. And she found that many of these lynchings weren't for any real crimes, but occurred when some Black people showed signs of success in social competition. By contextualizing facts and situating objectivity among the humans that generated and were affected by such facts, Wells uncovered something closer to the truth. So the traditional press was limited by its cultural biases, and even their so-called fact-based reporting had failed to uncover the truth about violence against Black people. In other words, seemingly objective journalism reinforced the status quo. So more subjective, but no less true views were thus epistemologically and morally necessary to counter the hegemonic thinking and create more meaningful and comprehensively true forms of communication. So the Black press counters hegemony, improves the truth-seeking abilities of the general public sphere, and provides education, uplift, and advocacy for those otherwise excluded from media. So here's a short timeline of just some of the examples of the Black press playing this role. After the Civil War ends in 1865, the Black press helped those newly freed negotiate the world of work and trades available, providing scientific guidance on things like agriculture, carpentry, and making tools. The Black press of this era explained how to vote, what rights African Americans had, and how, for example, Supreme Court rulings would affect the Black community. We've already addressed some of Ida B. Wells' work, and she really is an inspiring American icon, fighting for women's rights, exposing the injustices of Jim Crow. She's a co-founder of the NAACP, which is a great organization. We have a local branch here in Morgantown. You should join if you're not a member, and otherwise educating anyone who would listen. In 1916, the Chicago Defender, probably the most influential and successful of all Black newspapers, had a national edition that facilitated what's called the Great Migration. This is when millions of African Americans relocated from the rural South to northern cities, and the paper aggressively editorialized against the repressive conditions of the South and celebrated the opportunities of the North, printing things like job openings and change schedules to help ease the move. Another Chicago newspaper helped start a trend across major cities in 1929 with the Don't Buy Where You Can't Work campaign. Especially acute during the Great Depression, Black Americans had unemployment rates of 2 to 3 times higher than white Americans, as many businesses refused to hire non-white folks. In an example where an organized consumer boycott actually worked, this led to the hiring of thousands of African Americans, primarily as clerks in department stores. The Pittsburgh Courier, just up the road, was also a major force in the Black press history and arguably provided the momentum necessary for the relatively successful period of civil rights in the US of the 1950s and 1960s. To much success, the Courier ran what they called a double victory campaign during World War II. So they simply pointed out the sacrifices and patriotism of Black soldiers who would then return home to a position of social inferiority. So the campaign pushed for victory against fascism abroad and racism at home, hence the double victory. This exposed the unjust irony of asking African Americans to fight racists overseas, only to then face racists in their own country, generating important social conversations and springboarding the civil rights work of the 1950s and beyond. And this really is just a sliver of how the Black press could educate, uplift, and advocate for African Americans. And these were all clear examples of advocacy at a larger level of social equality. But another key role of the Black press, and one unfulfilled by dominant media, was that level of advocacy and basic identity building in everyday life. So even beyond the larger structural issues of politics and racism, and in addition to countering misrepresentation and exclusion, the Black press did the crucial work of providing constructive meaning and identity-making tools of everyday life. This is a more subtle but just as valuable form of advocacy, providing opportunities for joy and pleasure, celebrating Black excellence, and otherwise acting as a life-affirming mirror for African American individuals and communities. Newspapers would print human interest stories, advice columns, stories about members of the community and their successes, like somebody graduating from college or even someone getting a minor promotion at work. No act of advocacy was too small, and African Americans could then see themselves in the news. So in talking about the importance of self-representation and controlling the tools of identity work, it's really hard to overstate, and this is something that many people do take for granted, of seeing oneself in the news, of being invited by media to create oneself of and as a part of the world. This is the importance of representation and having an opportunity to see what one may become. I won't get too philosophical here, but really our modern identities are very much reliant on media. It is one of the primary ways we are invited to imagine kind of who we are and what we should be. And these are just some of the local kind of place-based newspapers where Black folks could see themselves and thus build themselves through the news. This top image from W.E.B. Du Bois's publication is a recurring segment of Men of the Month. This one actually includes a woman as well. On the bottom here of the Chicago Defender, it's celebrating business and employment success of some of its local residents. So the Black press advocates on both that larger systemic level, but also in the realm of everyday life. And again, it's hard to overstate the power of kind of constructive representation. And what's really special about the Black press is that it provides an opportunity for self-determined identity work and uplifting individuals, but this is largely achieved by creating a larger sense of community. So through this, we can see that the Black press operates by what I'll call an ethics of care. I didn't go into this ethical system too philosophically here, but it differs than kind of traditional ethics, the traditional ethics that we know of that kind of was one of the foundations of traditional journalism. So compared to kind of the ethics of classical liberalism here, instead of a world of individuals entitled to rights, there's an emphasis on relationships. The Black press doesn't operate by absolute principles or stand outside the community to report on it. Instead, is it embedded in the community and attentive, asking how it should respond. It's not filled with just the facts, but understands the importance of context. It is proportionate, that is, it provides care for the vulnerable and covers issues it sees as relevant to social needs and not just self-centered utility or gain. And perhaps most importantly, it understands there is no such thing as isolated individuals or abstract communities, but that these co-constitute one another, that these entities make each other what they are. So using our metaphors, we can also see that the Black press improves both journalism and democracy. It plays a more accurate mirror to society, acts as a watchdog for more interests, and provides the marketplace of ideas with reliable, fruitful information. The Black press also innovated journalistic practices like making objectivity self-reflexive and seeing beyond cultural biases, making objectivity more meaningful and true. Also valuable in its own right, however, the Black press increased sovereignty and improved deliberation, helping to realize the promise of all men, and today we can take away the gender, of all people being created equal or equally deserving of resources, care, and respect. So in solidarity with Nikole Hannah-Jones of the 1619 Project, this is all to say that America was not a democracy until women, Black people, and other activists made it one. The Black press was a key tool to build community, advocate for rights, criticize society, and create more caring and attentive citizens. It served the functions of the conventional press and then some, expanding the public sphere and what it meant to be part of a larger community. And what's more, this was not just for Black folks, but could serve anyone willing to pay attention. Anyone could learn lessons of humility, empathy, and what it means to be a caring citizen by reading the Black press or participating in public deliberation in language innovated by this key social institution. So after a look at this history, we can better define the Black press, which historically took the forms of newspapers and magazines. We can see that they were Black owned and operated, that they were intended for Black citizens, although they could serve anyone willing to listen, and that they could also be characterized by their social roles of education, uplift, community building, and identity work. In other words, they advocated for African Americans and are unabashedly pro-Black. The digital transformation of the mediascape, though, has brought new issues and challenges to the Black press, and none is more pertinent than the question of ownership. So the Black press has always been Black owned and operated, and there are still around 170 Black owned newspapers with a digital presence. But increasingly, especially in an environment of media consolidation and ownership consolidation, white owned media companies are profiting from content aimed at Black audiences. So NBC News, for example, produces NBC BLK, described as news and opinions from the African American perspective. Vice Media owns Refinery 29, a site that has a specific feed featuring, quote, Black women's stories. A site called Cocoa Butter is owned by BuzzFeed. So one historian actually calls this an example of media blackface. But ownership aside, these outlets still do create content for Black audiences, hire Black media practitioners, and employ characteristics of the traditional Black press. Some practitioners even suggest that the current mediascape requires the support of these larger organizations. Still, the issue over who is benefiting from Black labor and who is accumulating wealth off of Black audiences demands that we kind of continually question these ownership models, especially considering the history of thwarted Black sovereignty. Another issue critics point to is the seemingly disproportionate amount of infotainment and so-called soft news offered Black audiences online. The editors of Black newspapers, for example, argue that such content does not meet African American news needs. And while such concerns are warranted, soft news can also play a significant role for citizens in a democracy, especially the marginalized. We can't romanticize such content, but in a racist world, Black infotainment is its own form of uplift, advocacy, and community building. So with such caveats in mind, there are a number of quality digital outlets that embody care, do the situated work of meaningful objectivity, and thus make a democratic public sphere more complete and closer to its stated ideals. It should be noted that there's still over 150 of the traditional newspapers that constitute the historical Black press online that have a digital presence. For those of you who are curious, the Pittsburgh Courier is still around, although it was bought up by the Chicago Defender in the 1960s and hasn't really regained the clout it once had as an independent publication. So in addition to these Black newspapers, there are a number of digital outlets that advocate for African Americans and improve democratic deliberation. So The Tribe, for example, is a Chicago-based digital outlet that uses journalism and art to empower democratic actors. So when a video went viral of a crowded house party that breached social distancing guidelines, pundits and politicians in the mainstream media were quick to call out Black irresponsibility. This was during the height of COVID. Tribe reporters, however, investigated, and the resulting coverage did not excuse the behavior, but added much needed nuance and accuracy. So when outlets like TMZ reported this incident, they said that 1,000 people had attended the party, and the number was closer to something like 100. Far from a hedonistic party, it was a memorial gathering for friends killed in gun violence, and many partygoers said they did not know they were a high risk of catching COVID-19. So instead of shaming these youths, the Tribe did the empirical work of journalism and exposed the communication failures and lack of trust between government officials, news media, and young Black Chicago citizens. So in the best tradition of the Black press, the Tribe thus combines empiricism with empathy, objectivity with subjectivity, and care with competent journalism. In addition to place-based outlets, some of these outlets are based on celebrity gossip. Some are focused on Black entrepreneurship and wealth management. Black Planet is a social media site. Black Agenda Report is an unapologetically left-wing site that criticizes both major political parties for inadequately serving the Black population and offers insightful news analysis from a perspective unavailable in the dominant press. The Root is an online magazine launched in 2008, offering news and views relevant to African Americans. And I appreciate its old motto of the blacker the content, the sweeter the truth, although its current motto is Black news and views with a whole lot of attitude. But really, I'm arguing, and maybe I'm arguing to the choir here for some of you, that such news and views are not just informative for Black audiences, but anyone can learn and be more fruitfully informed by engaging with the Black press. Today, I would say that most of these are relatively less radical or demanding of the dominant social order. They're less explicit about their advocacy. But in our current cultural milieu built on exclusion, polarization, and traditional forms of racism, even these relatively tame outlets are still a form of necessary advocacy, and ones built on good faith deliberation, objective facts, and reasoned debate. Again, bringing back the ethics of care, this is not some entitled form of advocacy that demands the world bend to its will, but is instead one that is attentive to others, grounded in objective facts, and engendering of community and care. One digital newspaper hybrid and relative newcomer to the Black press is West Virginia's own Black by God, the West Virginian, a publication started and maintained by Crystal Good. BBG continues the best traditions of the Black press, providing education, uplift, and advocacy, serving not only the 65,000 Black West Virginians, but all of those opens to its message. So if you want a fresh perspective on the state and local politics, or you want to see an exemplar of quality journalism, I highly recommend you visit blackbygod.org. Maybe consider making a donation or signing up for the newsletter. It covers all sorts of topics and beats and really helps make West Virginia into a tangible community, unlike any other publication out there. And here I've grabbed just a few of the topics that are circulating in the digital Black press today. Some stories you may not have heard about, but offer a larger perspective on the state of the nation and our local communities. The Black press, for example, was talking about police brutality for decades before it became a topic in mainstream news outlets, and considers issues important to marginalized groups that can provide useful, insightful information for citizens. Again, regardless of your gender, class, race, or whatever is going to set us apart, the point is the Black press is a press of solidarity. And even as it advocates for those specific people most excluded from dominant society, it does so by building community and cultivating care. So I hope you can see how important these issues are and how they would otherwise not be receiving adequate news coverage. And all of us, regardless of our social position, are served by the Black press and could learn from its practices and viewpoints. So really, I hope I've done my small part showing you the importance of the Black press and why, as a social institution instead of practices, it very much embodies the motto of the Faculty Justice Network here at WVU, the motto provided by Bell Hooks of centering those in the margins. In the realm of media, we can see how that such centering can improve journalism, enhance our ability to democratically build worlds, and helps ensure care is more inclusive, abundant, free-flowing, and effective. So thanks so much for your time, and I welcome any questions or comments you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. That was just amazing and a lot of really rich content. So I'm excited that those of us who are here are able to hear it, but I'm also excited that we're recording and that other people will be able to benefit from this presentation. Do we have any questions that folk want to ask who are present? I don't know if you're putting them
I do. Hi, Dr. Jones.
Hey, Tony, how's it going?
I just wanted to ask your opinion about, you spoke about it briefly about like some of the Black publications being owned by people that aren't Black. I know that a lot of people talk about like Jet Magazine and Ebony and Essence and everything like that. Like, why do you think like the originators of these publications decide to sell to someone else other than money?
And I will point out that a lot of Black journalists would argue that because of the way the mediascape works, that sometimes you do need more capital. You need more people investing than just the Black community. The problem is then other people get to profit off of the Black community. So yeah, I'm not sure about motivations. I really don't like to talk about other people's motivations and intentions. But it all comes down to money, right? I mean, like, what else would it be? Why would you then, I mean, if you see yourself as a member of a Black press, right? You owe something to the community besides making a profit. So perhaps you'd want to keep that within the community, but at the same time, that doesn't always happen. Clearly, we see people who just sell their outlets to the highest bidder, and that clearly is putting somebody's private interests before kind of the public good of the Black press. And yeah, we could question those practices, but at the same time, I'm not a business owner. I can't really speak to those motivations, I guess, but yeah.
Do you feel like the ownership changes the voice of the publication?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, and I will say a lot of these, some of these organizations who are owned by non-Black folks really do give free rein to the editors, the journalists who are actually creating the content, because they know they are not the ones to do that. But at the same time, of course, it changes it. Like, they're not allowed to be as, they're not allowed to advocate as loudly, I would argue. So yes, the ownership definitely changes the limits of what the Black press can say. So yeah, that might be another argument for why it should be Black owned and operated still.
I really appreciated what you talked about in terms of what can be learned from the Black press, right? So I really sort of underscored here for myself this idea of empiricism with empathy, right, as being a practice that could extend beyond the Black press, but into a practice in journalism, particularly when reporting incidents like you just described, the tribe. I remember specifically when that happened, but I didn't get the follow up. So I was one of the people who was very critical, like, oh, what are they doing? Da, da, da. But I had no idea that they were gathered for a memorial or that the numbers weren't what were originally reported. So I really appreciate that focus or the proposition that not only is this how the Black press operates, and here it's, care ethics, but that these can be adopted and should be perhaps, adopted by other news folk, because that is what creates, I think, this lack of trust of when, so I forgot what I was watching, but they were talking about when news media shows up in certain spaces and people don't want to give information, it may be because we have known that there's been a lack of this empathy, like, or paying attention to the context in the reporting, right? And so being able to, I guess, slant stories in such a way that, promote certain or promulgate certain narratives.
Right. I mean, there is a reason a lot of people don't trust journalists too, and not just marginalized groups, but journalists can misuse kind of their power. So my whole argument is I want to change journalism. I want to change it from this kind of this blank objectivity, this view from nowhere, right? That we're just being objective, to actually like, no, you're not just being objective. You have your own cultural biases. You have your own ways of seeing. So you need to actually counter that, but with some empathy, right? With some ideas that you ground your empiricism in truth. And like we saw, it's more true then. Like it improves objectivity when you are empathetic. So that's what I do, Dr. Anderson. I go to conferences around the world and I talk about the Black press as an exemplar of quality journalism, like what it could be. Let's all look at the Black press for how journalism could and should be. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Did anyone else have a question or comment?
I have a comment. I think that, my research is centered around counter stories and kind of challenging the current narrative or the narrative of the majority population and being able to show more facets of a story. And so I feel like when you were explaining what these publications originally were designed to do, it just seems like it's in alignment with a lot of the work that I'm doing too. So
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. You should cite me.
I sure will.
No, because I know your work's going to go far too. So yeah.
Yes. So I also wanted to, I think about my own work, because one of the things I'm asking people to do and giving feedback to you is also think about how these presentations from scholars, sort of this interdisciplinary opportunity to think about how it relates. And it makes me think about one of the things that we talk about in our work with, initiatives that are designed to create institutional transformation is that within the context of the hierarchy of influence in higher ed, we don't really allot for a lot of time for reflection and dialogue. And it made me think about this when you were talking about, like, I remember in high school, I was a high school editor of our newspaper, and there was always this urgency to get the paper out, right? So this urgency in some ways for me, that I characterize with journalism, like, so people are trying to get the story first, you're trying to get it out, that pressure for that can be an obstacle to getting the right information, because you're trying to be the first one who gets it out. So that maybe, I mean, what do you think about that as the way in which time operates in that discipline, and how it could perhaps unintentionally foster the kind of journalism that we're critiquing now?
Oh yeah, exactly. Like, and to me, with the 24-hour news cycle, with the constant, like every second is a deadline now because you can publish wherever online. So yeah, we have to question the incentives of journalism and what we actually value. And that's why I like to go back to the question of, like, what is journalism for? Is it to get the story out first? Like, no, it is to do these other things, to have good social conversations. Which is why I also appreciate a lot of the Black press doesn't publish every day, right? They are going to take the time to verify facts, to go through and make sure they have everything right. So it is slower news. And I think it is time we started valuing that slower, more quality news over this idea of constant deadlines. I mean, I'm guilty of it too. Every time I refresh my phone, I want to see a new headline. So I'm part of the problem. I think we're all part of that problem. But really, we need to question the incentives of like what we're doing with journalism and why we feel this need to be first when there's plenty of information out there. We need to kind of be able to figure out what's the quality stuff, and that takes time to find. Yeah.
So slower, I like that you use the word slower news, and maybe a better, like, I'm thinking about semantics, like vetted news. Like some stuff we get information and it's wrong. And then you go back being like, oh, wait, so vetted news that, you know, we can rely upon before, since you talked about how powerful journalism makes us think about different things and ideas. It's so powerful that there has to be, and I guess it's like that because some of us, I wait to hear a story or someone says, oh, somebody passed away or whatever the case is. Like I saw something about Simon Caldwell recently, the guy from, you know, that English guy who's on the America's Most Talented. And they were like something suggesting he had died. I'm like, what are these news sources? Let me wait until I hear something that's like from a vetted source. Like I feel like, okay, if NBC reports it or whatever, I could believe it, right? So becoming a call for that, I guess.
Yeah, and I remember like even so when Obamacare was being debated by the Supreme Court, it was initially reported that it was rejected because Chief Justice Roberts, a conservative, wrote the review, like was writing the opinion. So some journalists went and said, oh, it's been rejected. Like before it came out that no, it had not been rejected. So even basic facts get kind of messed up, let alone the nuances of, you know, truth and what that all means here too. I want to read this. Anitra wrote a comment on here. She's at work, so she can't really say it out loud. Basically that it helps us better engage journalism going forward, understanding its true intent and purpose and knowing the ways it wanders from its intent. It also encourages us to support Black journalism. I use Crystal Good, Black by God, often because she stays relevant to the most pressing issues in West Virginia. And yeah, like, I mean, I will argue all day long that everybody can improve by reading the Black press, that it's not just for a certain audience, that everyone can kind of learn from the issues being talked about, the points of views that come across. So yeah, thank you, Anitra. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Anyone else? I have a lot to say because I love this topic because I was in journalism, but I was thinking about like I love that you talked about like identity, the creation of identity, how it helps us to think about ourselves as Black people, right? So even when I think a lot about magazine journalism, and I remember sort of growing up with Ebony Junior. So my parents got Ebony magazine, but I got Ebony Juniors. And so Ebony Junior was a child, for those who may not know, it was a child-focused or targeted mini sort of magazine that had images of brown children. Like I had little Afro puffs and stuff like that, but I played little games and it had things like really geared toward me. So I kind of grew up with that. And Jet magazine, I remember when I started to really think about what was beautiful, what it mean to be a beautiful woman. Well, you would look at the Jet choices of who that woman, the beauty that was in there. And then I remember sort of conversations as I was growing up around images of Black beauty and, some pushback against colorism in the Black press. So who was getting most of the ads? And then over time, seeing an evolution of, how that was being dealt with by the images that you were seeing. So I think it's so powerful, not just the implications for, in terms of how other people see Black people, but how we see ourselves, right?
Yeah, exactly, like that. And I think that gets understated too, like that we talk about these big social issues, which are definitely necessary to talk about. But it's something that most people take for granted, right? That, oh, who cares if you're like reflected in media? What does that mean? Like, no, this is where we get to be invited. And I especially think of like those awful tests of like in the 1940s, before there was, that prevalent Black media, of like Black children self-identifying as lesser than because they didn't have positive representations. So I think that identity making of media is another reason why the Black press is just so important and so necessary even today, even when there's arguments like, oh, well, the mainstream media will cover Black issues, like not in the same way, right? So still another reason for why it's necessary.
Yeah, definitely agree.
Hi, I have a question.
Sure.
Dr. Jones, so I just moved here to West Virginia. I have never heard of Black by God, so I'm really happy that I attended this presentation.
Great.
But I lived in Florida for many years. apart from Jet and Ebony magazine that we've all talked about, why is it that a lot of these Black newspapers and media, why is it that they are not widely known? How do we make it so that people who are not journalists, people who are not in the know, can know about these resources that are available?
Yeah, that's a key question, right? So I was recently reading the minutes from the NABJ, the National Association of Black Journalists, and even there, the professors will ask their students, how many of you have heard like of a Black newspaper? And like maybe 20% of the students have. So even within the Black community, sometimes these newspapers are not known. Boy, what is the answer to that? I don't know. I mean, I hope just talking about it more. I think maybe relationships with like churches and stuff like that, where other people get known, like in our NAACP meetings, we talk a lot about Black by God as well. And Anitra mentioned that. So yeah, I guess through other organizations kind of putting these forward, but they're there. There's 150 of these newspapers around. Miami had one. I think Orlando still has one. So they're around. They don't have advertising budgets. They don't, they're very specialized media. So maybe they're not promoted as much by other people because they think, oh, it is just for the Black population. So yeah, I think that's one of the key issues of our day, right? Of how do we make these things more known, at least, and more available. Maybe some of so I'm in the Reed College of Media. I hope some of my students, Jacob, you're on this call, like you can, help put it on social media, right? Like circulate these ideas that these entities exist, because they need our support, they need care, they need resources, and we need to kind of help cultivate them as much as we can.
Mm-hmm. I noticed that Tony, we did the same thing, but she's quicker than me with her finger. She dropped the link to the Black by God West Virginia news link, ACUA. So if you'd like to just click on it, it'll take you right to that publication. And I'm sure on the site, you'll be able to see how to subscribe to it. I'm a subscriber, and I have really valued the work that Crystal Good is doing, not only with the production of that paper, but just in the community, period, across the state. Just really powerful players. So encourage you to take a look at that. Let me see, did anyone else want to ask any other questions? I think it's such a good discussion, though. I feel like we could go all day. Like we could have a forum on the Black press and its importance to larger society, as you have talked about, Dr. Jones, and especially what we can learn from it. Because I always appreciate that asset view. A lot of times people from marginalized communities, people tend to think about us with the deficit of like, okay, we're doing this to make up for that. But there's a lot that comes from communities that have been marginalized that the larger society can be improved by actually studying and looking at the methods that they use to exist, the practices that they have. And I don't know who to attribute this idea to, but the idea that if you deal with the least of them, if you begin to put your focus on the least of them, particularly in matters of equity and justice, and you start to seek out justice for those who are, perceived to be at the bottom of the totem pole, it meets out justice for everyone, right? And so, yeah, I love that idea. Really amazing scholarship. So I'm real interested. Keep me posted on what you are doing. And I definitely think that this is something that so many more of us can benefit from across WVU and beyond. So feel free to also share this video. I think that's it for now. Any closing comments, Dr. Jones?
I don't know, just thank you so much for hosting me. And you're so eloquent, like putting everything I said into words. So no notes, thank you.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you. Jacob, I just want to take an opportunity to thank you for all. He is our graduate assistant for the Faculty Justice Network. He does an amazing job. Tony, I want to thank you. She is on our advisory council, and she is previously working with us as a graduate assistant, but they both continue to be very supportive and just able to help us pull off these kinds of things. Lots of people are asking for these videos, so we will get them up and available on our FJN site, but also at the YouTube, on our YouTube page. So thank you all so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you at our future talks. When is our next one, Jacob?
Oh, you're on mute, Jacob.
Not until April 13th, I'm pretty sure.
Okay,
April 14th, rather.
okay. Is that Stephanie House Neon Gay?
Yes.
Oh, okay, awesome. Well, we have had some amazing speakers, and we look forward to the rest of those on our list for this semester. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Dr.
Bye for
Jones,
now.
thank you
Thank you.
again. All right, have a good one, everyone.